The dust cloud rising from the stagecoach announced trouble before Clara Whitmore even stepped down onto the wooden planks of Redemption, Texas, in the sweltering summer of 1878, her emerald eyes scanning the collection of weathered buildings and sun-baked faces that would become her new home whether she liked it or not. Clara had arrived from Boston to take over her late aunt's boarding house, a sprawling two-story structure that needed paint and repairs, but stood solid against the harsh Texas wind. She was 22 years old, educated, refined, and absolutely determined not to let this frontier town break her spirit the way it had broken so many others. Her auburn hair was pinned in an elaborate style that already felt ridiculous in the oppressive heat, and her traveling dress clung to her skin beneath the layers of petticoats that Boston society deemed necessary but Texas common sense would have discarded. The boarding house required immediate attention. The previous caretaker, a weathered woman named Mrs. Henderson, had kept things running during the 3 months since Aunt Margaret's passing, but she was eager to retire to her daughter's home in San Antonio. Clara spent her first week scrubbing floors, airing out rooms, and learning the names and habits of her 7 current boarders. There was old Mr. Jacobson, who worked at the general store, the Ramirez brothers, who were ranch hands at the Triple Crown spread, a quiet schoolteacher named Miss Pemberton, a traveling salesman who was rarely present, and 2 miners who spent their days searching for silver in the hills and their nights drinking away whatever meager findings they had unearthed. The work was exhausting but honest, and Clara found a strange satisfaction in the physical labor that her Boston upbringing had never prepared her for. She cooked large meals, changed linens, kept accounts, and gradually began to understand the rhythm of this small town where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast was served. It was during her 3rd week in Redemption that Clara attended her first town social at the community hall. The building was simple, constructed of rough-hewn timber with a pot-bellied stove at one end and a small raised platform at the other where local musicians would play. She had been invited by Miss Pemberton, who assured her that these gatherings were essential to becoming part of the community. Clara wore her finest dress, a deep blue silk that her mother had insisted she pack despite Clara's protests that she would have no use for such finery in Texas. As it turned out, her mother had been right. The moment Clara entered the hall, she felt the weight of curious stares from every direction. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming on the dance floor. Clara watched as men and women moved together in patterns that seemed both familiar and foreign. She recognized the basic structure of a waltz, but the execution was looser, more energetic, infused with a wildness that would have scandalized her Boston dance instructor. A tall rancher approached her, hat in hand, and asked for a dance. Clara accepted politely, but within moments she realized the man had 2 left feet and the grace of a bull in a china shop. He stepped on her toes twice, apologized profusely, and returned her to the sidelines looking mortified. 3 more men asked her to dance that evening, and 3 more proved equally clumsy. On her walk home with Miss Pemberton, Clara made an observation that would change everything. "I cannot understand how these men expect to court anyone when they dance like wounded cattle," she said, her tone more amused than critical. In Boston, a man's ability to dance was considered essential to his character. It showed discipline, grace, and respect for his partner. Miss Pemberton laughed. "This is not Boston, my dear. Most of these men learned whatever dancing they know from their mothers or at rough gatherings where staying upright was considered success." Clara considered this as they walked beneath the star-filled Texas sky. "Perhaps that is precisely the problem," she said thoughtfully. "Perhaps what this town needs is a standard, something to aspire to." The next morning, as Clara served breakfast to her boarders, Mr. Jacobson mentioned that young Tom Bradley had been asking about her. Tom was the son of the town's largest ranch owner, a handsome man of 25 with blonde hair and an easy smile that had charmed half the unmarried women in the county. "He is a good man," Mr. Jacobson said, spooning sugar into his coffee. "Hard-working, honest, stands to inherit a fine property." Clara poured coffee for the Ramirez brothers and considered her response carefully. "I am sure Mr. Bradley is all of those things," she said. "However, I should make it clear that I have no intention of marrying just anyone. When I do marry, it will be to a man who possesses certain qualities." "What qualities might those be?" asked the older Ramirez brother, genuine curiosity in his voice. Clara had not planned this speech, but the words came easily. "He must be kind, certainly. Honest and hardworking, of course, but he must also be able to dance, truly dance with skill and grace. A man who can dance shows patience, discipline, and a willingness to consider his partner's needs above his own comfort." The table fell silent for a moment before the younger Ramirez brother burst out laughing. "Well, that eliminates most of the men in this territory," he said. Clara smiled sweetly. "Then I suppose most of the men in this territory will not be marrying me." By noon, her statement had spread through Redemption like wildfire. By evening, it had become the primary topic of conversation in both saloons, the general store, and every dinner table in town. Some people thought it was hilarious, others found it pretentious, but everyone agreed it was the most interesting thing to happen in Redemption in months. Clara had not intended to cause such a stir. She had simply stated her preference, as was her right. But as the days passed and the gossip continued, she found herself in the unexpected position of having to defend her stance. Mrs. Chen, who ran the town's restaurant, brought it up when Clara stopped by for supplies. "You are making the men of this town very nervous," she said, her English precise despite the slight accent. "They think you believe you are too good for them." "That is not what I said at all," Clara protested. "I simply said that dancing ability matters to me. Surely I am allowed to have standards for my own life." Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. "Of course you are, but you should know that you have also issued a challenge whether you meant to or not, and Western men do not back down from challenges." Clara soon discovered the truth of this observation. Several men made efforts to demonstrate their dancing abilities, with varying degrees of success. Tom Bradley showed up at her boarding house one evening and attempted an awkward waltz on her front porch, but his movements were stiff and uncomfortable, more dutiful than skillful. She thanked him kindly but remained unmoved. It was during this time that Jack Morrison first saw Clara Whitmore, though she did not see him. Jack was a cowboy through and through, 26 years old, with dark hair that perpetually needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. He worked for the Triple Crown Ranch, the same spread that employed the Ramirez brothers, and he was widely considered one of the best horsemen in 3 counties. Jack had been in the general store when Clara entered, her arms full of linens she needed to exchange. He watched as she moved through the space with unconscious grace, her voice polite but firm as she explained to Mr. Jacobson exactly what she needed. There was something about her that caught his attention, a quality he could not quite name but felt drawn to nonetheless. "That is the boarding house lady," whispered his friend Pete, who had noticed Jack's stare. "The one who says she will only marry a man who can dance." Jack said nothing, but something shifted in his chest, a recognition that felt both exciting and terrifying. He left the store without speaking to her, his mind already working on a problem he had not known existed 5 minutes earlier. The thing was, Jack Morrison could not dance. He had never had cause to learn. His childhood had been spent working his father's failed farm in Missouri, until his parents died of fever when he was 15. He had come west alone, learned to rope and ride, and built a reputation as a reliable hand who could gentle the wildest horse and work longer hours than men 10 years younger. Dancing had never factored into his survival or success. But now, watching Clara Whitmore walk down the street with the late afternoon sun turning her auburn hair to flame, Jack felt the absence of that skill like a physical ache. He was not normally an impulsive man, but he was also not a coward. If Clara Whitmore would only marry a man who could dance, then Jack Morrison would learn to dance. The decision was simple. The execution would prove considerably more complicated. Jack's first challenge was finding someone to teach him. The idea of asking around town was immediately dismissed. He could not bear the thought of becoming another source of gossip or, worse, another man who publicly failed to meet Clara's standards. He needed to learn in private, away from watching eyes and wagging tongues. He considered and rejected several options before remembering something Pete had mentioned months ago. There was a woman named Rosa Martinez who lived in a small homestead about 5 miles outside town. She had been a dancer in Mexico City before marrying a rancher and moving to Texas. Her husband had died 2 years ago, and she now lived alone, taking in sewing work and keeping to herself. Jack rode out to her property on his day off, his stomach tight with nervousness. The homestead was small but well-maintained, with a garden that showed careful attention and a house that, while modest, looked solid and weather-tight. Rosa Martinez answered his knock with a questioning expression. She was perhaps 45 years old, with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that were both kind and shrewd. "Mrs. Martinez," Jack said, removing his hat. "My name is Jack Morrison. I work at the Triple Crown Ranch. I have come to ask you something, and I hope you will not think me foolish." Rosa studied him for a long moment. "Come inside, Mr. Morrison. I will make coffee, and you can tell me what brings you to my door." Seated at her small kitchen table, Jack explained his situation as honestly as he could. He told her about Clara Whitmore, about the standard she had set, and about his complete lack of dancing ability. "I am willing to pay for lessons," he concluded, "and I am willing to work hard, but I need someone who can teach me properly, and I need to learn where no one else will see." Rosa was quiet for a long time, sipping her coffee and watching him with those shrewd eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Why this woman? You have not even spoken to her, yes. Why does she matter so much?" Jack had asked himself the same question. "I cannot explain it entirely," he admitted. "But when I saw her, something just felt right, like recognizing something I did not know I was looking for. I know that sounds foolish." "It sounds honest," Rosa corrected, "and honesty is not foolish." She set down her coffee cup and folded her hands on the table. "I will teach you, Mr. Morrison. But I must tell you, learning to dance properly takes time. It is not just steps, it is understanding rhythm, learning to lead, developing grace. If you are serious about this, you must commit completely." "I am serious," Jack said. "Then we begin tomorrow evening. Come after your work is finished." "And Mr. Morrison, wear boots you can move in, not your heavy work boots. Dancing is hard on the feet." Thus began 3 weeks of the most challenging physical work Jack had ever undertaken, and he had once helped build a barn in the middle of a rainstorm. He arrived at Rosa's homestead every evening after finishing his ranch duties, often tired and sore from a full day of work. Rosa showed no mercy. The first week was devoted entirely to basic footwork and rhythm. Rosa used no music at first, only the steady beat of her hands clapping or a wooden spoon against a table. "You must feel the rhythm in your body before you can move to it gracefully," she explained. "Walk with me. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Jack stumbled constantly. His body, so coordinated on horseback or with a lasso, seemed utterly incapable of these precise, measured movements. He stepped on Rosa's toes, lost count, and moved the wrong direction more times than he could track. But Rosa remained patient, correcting him firmly but never cruelly. "You are thinking too much," she would say. "The mind cannot lead in dancing, the body must learn until the movement becomes natural." On the 4th evening, Jack arrived discouraged and exhausted. He had been kicked by a young stallion that morning and his ribs ached with every breath. "Perhaps this is foolish," he said as Rosa opened the door. "Perhaps I am not meant for this." Rosa looked at him sternly. "Are you quitting, Mr. Morrison?" Jack thought of Clara Whitmore, the way she had moved through the general store, the intelligence in her eyes. "No," he said. "I am not quitting." Then stop feeling sorry for yourself and come inside. Tonight we add music." The music changed everything. Rosa played an old guitar, her fingers finding melodies that seemed to speak directly to something deep in Jack's chest. With the music as a guide, the steps began to make sense in a way they had not before. His body started to understand what his mind had been struggling to grasp. By the end of the first week, Jack could execute a basic waltz without counting aloud or watching his feet. By the end of the second week, he could lead Rosa through a simple polka and a Scottish without major errors. But Rosa was not satisfied. "You are competent now," she said, "but competent is not enough. This woman you want to impress, she will know the difference between a man who has memorized steps and a man who truly dances. If you want to win her, you must go deeper." The third week was about refinement and feeling. Rosa taught him to anticipate his partner's movements, to communicate intention through subtle pressure and positioning. She taught him how to move across a floor with confidence, how to make even simple steps look elegant, how to make his partner feel like the most important person in the room. "Dancing is a conversation," Rosa explained one evening as they practiced a more complex waltz pattern. "You must listen as much as you lead. Every woman is different. You must learn to adjust to your partner." Jack absorbed everything like parched earth drinking rain. He practiced during his lunch breaks, running through footwork patterns while his fellow ranch hands ate and joked. He practiced in the bunkhouse at night, moving silently through steps while the other men slept. He dreamed in three-quarter time and woke with rhythms running through his head. On the final evening of the third week, Rosa put him through the most challenging practice yet. They danced for 2 straight hours, moving through every style she had taught him, pushing his endurance and skill. When they finally stopped, Jack was drenched in sweat, but moving with a grace that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks earlier. Rosa smiled at him, genuine warmth in her expression. "You have worked very hard, Mr. Morrison. You have become a good dancer. More importantly, you have learned to be present with your partner to make her feel valued. That is the real gift of dancing." Jack paid Rosa what they had agreed upon, plus extra that he insisted she take. As he prepared to leave, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "One more thing," she said. "When you finally dance with this woman, do not think about the steps or what people are watching. Think only about her. Make her feel like she is the only person in the world. That is what will win her heart." Jack rode back to the ranch that night with something he had not felt in years. Hope mixed with absolute terror. He had done what he set out to do. He had learned to dance. Now came the much harder part, actually dancing with Clara Whitmore, but fate, as it often does, had its own timeline. The very next day, as Jack was in town picking up supplies for the ranch, he saw a commotion outside the boarding house. A well-dressed man was standing on the front steps, arguing loudly with Clara. "You cannot simply dismiss me without even giving me a chance," the man was saying, his voice carrying down the street. Jack recognized him as Robert Sinclair, a wealthy cattle buyer from Dallas who was in town on business. Clara stood in the doorway, her posture rigid with barely contained anger. "Mr. Sinclair, I have given you my answer multiple times. I'm not interested in your attentions. Please leave my property." "Just one dance," Sinclair pressed. "Surely you can grant me that much, or is this whole dancing requirement just an excuse to reject every man who approaches you? Perhaps you simply think you are too good for Western men." Jack saw Clara's expression shift from anger to hurt, and something inside him snapped. He crossed the street in long strides, his boots loud on the wooden planks. "The lady asked you to leave," Jack said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that made Sinclair turn around. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy," Sinclair sneered, taking in Jack's dusty work clothes and worn hat. "I am making it my concern," Jack replied. He was not a violent man by nature, but he had worked hard all his life and was not afraid of soft-handed city men who thought money gave them the right to bully women. Sinclair seemed to consider pushing the confrontation, then thought better of it. "This town is full of fools," he muttered, Brushing past Jack and stalking toward the hotel, Jack turned to Clara, suddenly aware that this was the first time he had actually spoken to her. Up close, she was even more striking than he had realized. Her green eyes were bright with unshed tears of frustration, and her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her apron. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That was kind of you." "No man should speak to you that way," Jack replied. "I apologize that you had to endure it." Clara studied him for a moment, and Jack felt the weight of her intelligent gaze. "You work for the Triple Crown, do you not? You room with the Ramirez brothers at my boarding house." "I do not currently room there, but yes, I work at the Triple Crown. My name is Jack Morrison." He held out his hand, and after a brief hesitation, she took it. "Clara Whitmore, I imagine you have heard of my supposed standards regarding dancing." There was a defensive edge to her voice. "I have heard," Jack admitted. "And I do not think it is unreasonable for a woman to know what she wants and to refuse to settle for less." Clara's expression softened slightly. "You may be the first man in this town to say so." Jack wanted to tell her that he had spent the last 3 weeks learning to dance specifically because of her declaration. He wanted to ask her to give him a chance, to let him prove that some men were willing to put in the effort to be worthy of her. But something held him back. The timing did not feel right, and he did not want her to think he was just another man pestering her for attention. Instead, he tipped his hat and said, "I should let you get back to your work, Miss Whitmore. I hope the rest of your day is more pleasant." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Mr. Morrison, thank you again. Your kindness will not be forgotten." Jack walked away feeling like he had just passed some kind of test he had not known he was taking. The encounter left him more determined than ever to find the right moment to show Clara what he had learned, but also more nervous about the prospect. Now that he had spoken to her, now that he had seen up close the intelligence and strength in her eyes, the stakes felt even higher. That evening at the ranch, Pete noticed Jack's distracted state. "You look like a man with something on his mind," he observed as they tended to the horses. Jack considered keeping his secrets, but Pete was a good friend, one of the few people he trusted completely. "I learned to dance," he said quietly, checking to make sure no one else was in earshot. "I have been taking lessons for 3 weeks." Pete's eyes widened. "You what? Why would you do that?" Then comprehension dawned on his face. "The boarding house lady, you learned to dance for her." "Her name is Clara," Jack said, "and yes, I did." "That is either the bravest or the most foolish thing I have ever heard," Pete said with a low whistle. "What are you going to do now?" "I have no idea," Jack admitted. "There is a town social next Saturday." "I suppose that would be the logical time to ask her to dance. But what if I stumble? What if I freeze up? What if she says no?" Pete clapped him on the shoulder. "Then you will survive, just like you have survived everything else life has thrown at you, but Jack, you have to actually try. You did not spend 3 weeks learning to dance just to lose your nerve at the crucial moment." Pete was right, of course. Jack had come too far to back out now. The question was how to approach Clara in a way that did not make him just another in a long line of men seeking her attention. The answer came from an unexpected source. On Thursday evening, Jack received a message that one of his former employers, Old Man Hutchins, had died. Hutchins had given Jack his first job in Texas 10 years ago, and despite moving on to other work, Jack had maintained a friendship with the elderly rancher. The funeral would be held Friday afternoon, and as one of Hutchins' longtime friends, Jack was asked to be a pallbearer. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by most of the ranching community. Jack was surprised to see Clara Whitmore there, dressed in a simple black dress, sitting near the back of the church. Afterward, during the gathering at the Hutchins homestead, he learned that Old Man Hutchins had been a regular customer at her aunt's boarding house for over 20 years. "He was one of the first people to welcome me when I arrived," Clara told Jack when they found themselves standing near each other at the refreshment table. "He would tell me stories about my aunt, about the early days of redemption. He was a good man." "He was," Jack agreed. "He gave me my first job when I came to Texas. Taught me more about ranching in 6 months than most men learn in years." They talked quietly for several minutes, sharing memories of the old man. Jack was struck by how easy it was to talk to Clara when the pressure of courtship was removed. She was funny and insightful, with a sharp wit that never crossed into meanness. She asked him questions about his work and actually seemed interested in the answers. As the gathering began to break up, Jack made a decision. "Miss Whitmore, may I walk you back to town?" Clara glanced at the sky, where afternoon was sliding toward evening. "That would be appreciated, Mr. Morrison. Thank you." They walked in comfortable silence for the first part of the journey. The Texas landscape stretched around them, vast and golden in the late daylight. A hawk circled overhead, and somewhere in the distance cattle were lowing. "Can I ask you something?" Jack said finally. "Your requirement about dancing, I know it has caused quite a stir, but why is it truly important to you?" Clara was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "When I was growing up in Boston, my father taught me to dance," she said finally. "He was not a wealthy man, just a clerk, but he believed that dancing was important. He said that in dancing you could learn everything you needed to know about a person. How they treated their partner, whether they listened, whether they were patient or selfish. He said a man who danced well was a man who could be trusted to consider someone else's needs, not just his own." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Jack said. "He was. He died when I was 18. Before he passed, he made me promise that I would never settle for less than I deserved, that I would wait for a man who showed through his actions, not just his words, that he valued me." Dancing became the symbol of that promise. It is not about the skill itself, not really. It is about finding someone willing to put in the effort, to step outside his comfort zone, to meet me where I stand rather than demanding I lower my standards to make things easier for him. Jack felt his heart beating faster. "That makes perfect sense to me," he said. "And I think your father was right. A person's true character shows in how they treat their partner in all aspects of life." They had reached the edge of town. Clara stopped and turned to face him. "Thank you for walking with me, Mr. Morrison, and thank you for understanding. Most people think I am being difficult or pretentious. Most people are fools," Jack said, surprised by his own boldness. "Miss Whitmore, there is a town social on Saturday evening. Would you do me the honor of saving me a dance?" Clara's expression was difficult to read. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate the offer, but I should tell you honestly that I have been disappointed many times already. I do not wish to hurt your feelings, but if you cannot truly dance, I would rather not go through another awkward experience." "I understand completely," Jack said. "And I would not ask if I did not believe I could meet your standards. I will not press you for an answer now. But if you decide to give me a chance, I will be at the social, and I hope you will save me one dance." He tipped his hat and walked away before she could respond, his heart pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. He had done it. He had asked her, and while she had not said yes, she had not said no either. The next day and a half passed with agonizing slowness. Jack worked himself nearly to exhaustion trying to keep his mind occupied. He practiced his dancing footwork in the barn when no one was looking. He changed his shirt 3 times on Saturday evening, uncertain which one looked best, before settling on his newest one, a dark blue that Pete assured him brought out his eyes. The community hall was already crowded when Jack arrived. It seemed like half the county had turned out for the social, drawn by good weather, the promise of Mrs. Chen's cooking, and probably the ongoing entertainment of watching men attempt to win Clara Whitmore's approval through dance. Jack spotted Clara almost immediately. She wore a dress the color of burgundy wine that made her auburn hair seem to glow in the lamplight. She was standing with Miss Pemberton and a few other women, and as Jack watched, Tom Bradley approached her with a determined expression. Jack could not hear the conversation, but he saw Clara shake her head politely and Tom walk away looking dejected. 2 more men approached her over the next 30 minutes, and both were similarly dismissed. Jack began to wonder if she was refusing to dance with anyone tonight. Then the musicians struck up a waltz, and something inside Jack simply knew it was time. He crossed the room with steady, confident steps, keeping his breathing calm and his shoulders relaxed the way Rosa had taught him. Clara saw him coming, and he caught something in her expression, a flicker of something that might have been curiosity or possibly hope. "Miss Whitmore," he said, extending his hand. "I believe I asked you to save me a dance. Will you honor me now?" For a long moment, Clara simply looked at him. Jack could see her weighing the decision, considering whether to protect herself from another disappointment or take a chance. Finally, she placed her hand in his. "One dance, Mr. Morrison. Let us see if your confidence is warranted." Jack led her onto the floor, acutely aware that multiple eyes were watching them. Tom Bradley looked annoyed. Several other men seemed amused, clearly expecting Jack to join the ranks of those who had failed to meet Clara's standards. But Jack blocked out all of it, remembering Rosa's final advice. "Think only about her. Make her feel like she is the only person in the world." He positioned them properly, one hand at Clara's waist, the other holding her hand gently but firmly. He waited for the right moment in the music, then began to move. The first few steps were careful, letting Clara understand that he knew what he was doing, that she could trust his lead. Then, as he felt her relax slightly, he began to truly dance. They moved across the floor in perfect three-quarter time, Jack leading with confidence but never forcefulness, always giving Clara space to move gracefully. He guided her through a simple turn, then another more complex one, feeling the way her body followed his lead naturally, the way a good partnership should feel. Clara's eyes widened with surprise, and Jack saw the exact moment she realized he was actually skilled. Her posture changed, her initial defensive caution melting into genuine engagement. They moved together with increasing fluidity, and Jack found himself enjoying not just the dancing itself, but the incredible feeling of connection it created. "Mr. Morrison," Clara said as they swept past the musician's platform, "where did you learn to dance like this?" "I had a good teacher," Jack replied, "and excellent motivation to learn." "How long have you been dancing?" 3 weeks, Jack said honestly. "I started the day after I heard about your requirement." Clara missed half a step, and Jack smoothly adjusted to compensate. "You learned to dance in 3 weeks, just because I said I would only marry a man who could dance." "I learned to dance in 3 weeks because you are worth the effort of learning," Jack corrected. "And because I realized that if I wanted even a chance to know you, I needed to meet you where you stood, not expect you to lower your standards for me." The music swelled toward its conclusion, and Jack guided them through a final series of turns that brought them to a perfect stop exactly as the last note faded. For a moment, they simply stood there, still holding each other, both slightly breathless. The room erupted in applause, but Jack barely heard it. All his attention was focused on Clara's face, on the way she was looking at him like he had just revealed something important and unexpected. "That was remarkable," she said softly. "You are not just competent, Mr. Morrison. You are genuinely skilled." "Would you dance with me again?" Jack asked. "The musicians are starting another song." "Yes," Clara said, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice. "Yes, I would like that very much." They danced 3 more times that evening, and with each dance, something shifted between them. The initial surprise gave way to comfort, and comfort gave way to something deeper and more electric. They talked between dances, sharing stories and learning about each other. Jack discovered that Clara had a passion for reading and had brought a small library of books with her from Boston. Clara learned that Jack had taught himself to read during lonely nights as a young ranch hand, using whatever newspapers and books he could acquire. Other men attempted to cut in, but Clara politely refused them all, choosing to spend the evening with Jack. By the time the social ended, the entire town was buzzing with the news that Clara Whitmore had finally found a man who met her standards. And that man was Jack Morrison, a simple cowboy from the Triple Crown Ranch. Jack walked Clara home through the warm Texas night, the sky above them dense with stars. They moved slowly, neither in a hurry for the evening to end. "I must confess something," Clara said as they neared the boarding house. "When you first asked me to dance, I almost said no outright. I was tired of being disappointed, tired of being made to feel difficult because I refused to settle. But something made me take the chance. I am very glad I did." "I am glad you did too," Jack said. "Clara, I know this evening has been unexpected, but I would like to see you again properly." "May I call on you tomorrow afternoon?" "I would like that," Clara said. "Come by around 3 o'clock. I will have finished most of my work by then and we can take a walk." They stood on her front porch for a moment, the lamplight from inside casting soft shadows. Jack wanted to kiss her but knew it was too soon. Instead, he took her hand and brought it to his lips, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and exactly right. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Jack." Jack walked back toward the ranch feeling like his feet were not quite touching the ground. In the span of a few hours, his entire world had shifted. He had taken a chance, put in the work, and found something precious on the other side of his fear. The next afternoon, Jack arrived at the boarding house at precisely 3 o'clock. He had bathed, shaved carefully, and worn his best clothes. Clara answered the door in a simple day dress of pale green that made her eyes seem to glow. They walked toward the edge of town, following a path that led to a small creek shaded by cottonwood trees. "Tell me about yourself," Clara said as they walked. "Where did you grow up?" "What brought you to Texas?" Jack told her about Missouri, about his parents' farm and their deaths, about coming west alone as a teenager with nothing but the clothes on his back and a desperate need to survive. He told her about the hard years of learning, about sleeping rough and going hungry, about slowly building a reputation as a skilled hand. He spoke honestly about the loneliness of that life, about feeling unmoored from any real community or connection. "And now?" Clara asked gently. "Do you still feel that way?" "Less so," Jack admitted. "The Triple Crown has been good to me, the boss is fair, the work is honest, but yes, there has always been a sense of something missing. Like I was just passing through life rather than actually living it." "I understand that feeling," Clara said. "After my father died, I felt lost. I went through the motions of life in Boston, but nothing felt real or important. When my aunt left me the boarding house, I saw it as a chance to start over, to build something meaningful. But it has been harder than I expected. This town has been slow to accept me, and I have been slow to accept it. Last night was the first time since arriving that I actually felt like I might belong here." They reached the creek and sat on a fallen log near the water's edge. The afternoon was warm but not oppressive, with a breeze that stirred the cottonwood leaves and created shifting patterns of light and shadow. "Can I ask you something?" Jack said. "You could have any man you wanted, especially back in Boston where the social circles value the things you value. Why stay in redemption? Why not sell the boarding house and return to the life you knew?" Clara trailed her fingers in the creek water, watching the ripples spread. "Because that life was not truly mine. It was my mother's life, my sister's lives, but I never fit there. I was always asking too many questions, reading the wrong books, expressing opinions that proper Boston ladies were not supposed to have. Here, despite the challenges, I have the freedom to be myself. To run a business, to state my preferences without apology, to live on my own terms. That freedom is worth more than any amount of social acceptance in Boston." "You are remarkable," Jack said, the words escaping before he could censor them. Clara turned to look at him, her cheeks slightly pink. "You are only saying that because I agreed to dance with you." "No," Jack said seriously. "I am saying it because it is true. You are brave and honest and determined. You know what you want and you are not afraid to pursue it. Those are rare qualities in anyone, man or woman." They talked for hours, losing track of time as the conversation flowed from topic to topic. They discussed books, and Jack was pleased to discover he had read several that Clara loved. They talked about the future of the West, about the railroads changing everything, about the tension between progress and preservation. They found they agreed on some things and disagreed on others, but the disagreements were stimulating rather than divisive. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Jack walked Clara back to the boarding house. At her door, she turned to him with a smile that made his heart stutter. "Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow evening? I cook for my boarders every night, and there is always room for one more at the table." "I would like that very much," Jack said. Thus began a courtship that fascinated the entire town of Redemption. Jack called on Clara regularly, and they were frequently seen walking together, talking in the shade of the general store's awning or attending church together on Sunday mornings. Jack helped with repairs at the boarding house, fixing a loose step and reinforcing the porch railing. Clara packed special lunches for Jack to take to the ranch, and the Ramirez brothers teased him mercilessly about the care she took with the preparations. They attended every town social together, and watching them dance became a favorite pastime for the other residents. They moved together with such natural grace and obvious connection that even those who had initially mocked Clara's requirements began to understand what she had been seeking. But it was not all easy. There were challenges and obstacles, as there always are in any meaningful relationship. Some of the townswomen, jealous of the attention Clara received, began spreading rumors that she had lowered her standards, that Jack was not actually as good a dancer as people claimed. Tom Bradley, still smarting from rejection, made several comments around town suggesting that Jack had somehow tricked or deceived Clara. The rumors came to a head about 6 weeks into their courtship. Jack arrived at the boarding house one evening to find Clara upset, her eyes red from crying. Mr. Jacobson had overheard Tom Bradley telling people at the saloon that Jack had paid Rosa Martinez not just for dance lessons, but for her to spread favorable stories about him in town, making him seem more honorable than he was. "It is ridiculous," Clara said angrily, pacing her small sitting room. "Anyone who knows you can see it is a lie, but Tom has influence in this town because of his father and people are listening to him." Jack felt a cold anger settling in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Would you like me to confront him?" "No," Clara said immediately. "That would only make things worse. He wants a confrontation. He wants to make you look like a brute so he can play the gentleman." "Then what do you want me to do?" Jack asked. Clara stopped pacing and looked at him directly. "I want you to ignore him. I want us to keep living our lives, being honest and good to each other. The truth has a way of revealing itself. People who matter will see through his lies." It was hard advice to follow. Jack's instinct was to defend his honor and Clara's directly. But he trusted her judgment, so he kept his temper and continued as they had been. Rosa Martinez, when she heard the rumors, marched into town herself and set the record straight, telling anyone who would listen that Jack had paid her fairly for honest lessons and nothing more. Her testimony, delivered with the kind of dignity that demanded respect, went a long way towards silencing the gossip. Tom Bradley, realizing his tactics were backfiring, eventually backed off, though he never apologized. Jack counted it as a victory that Clara had been right. The truth had revealed itself without requiring violence or drama. As summer gave way to fall, Jack and Clara's relationship deepened. They had progressed from the excitement of new attraction to something more substantial and enduring. They knew each other's habits and preferences. They had weathered their first real conflict and come through stronger. They had integrated into each other's lives in ways both large and small. It was during a crisp October evening, as they sat on Clara's porch watching the sun set, that Jack decided the time had come. He had been carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. He had finally realized that there would never be a perfect moment. There would only be the right feeling, and that feeling was present now. "Clara," he said, taking her hand, "I want to tell you something." She turned to him, her expression open and trusting. In the fading light, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "When I first saw you, I felt like I had been wandering my whole life and suddenly found a destination. These past months with you have been the happiest I have ever known. You challenge me to be better, you support me when I struggle, and you make even ordinary moments feel extraordinary. I love you, Clara. I want to spend the rest of my life dancing with you, both literally and figuratively. Will you marry me?" He pulled out the ring, a simple gold band with a small emerald that had belonged to his grandmother. It was not much compared to what wealthier men could offer, but it was genuine and meaningful. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Jack, I will marry you. I love you too so much." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "You learned to dance for me," Clara said, touching his face gently. "You put in the effort, you met my standard, but more than that, you saw why the standard mattered. You understood that it was never really about the dancing itself. It was about finding someone who valued you enough to put in the work," Jack finished. "Someone who would meet you where you stood." "Exactly," Clara whispered, kissing him again. They were married 6 weeks later on a bright November day with half the town in attendance. The ceremony was held in the church, with Reverend Matthews officiating and Miss Pemberton serving as Clara's maid of honor. Pete stood up for Jack, grinning throughout the entire ceremony. Rosa Martinez sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and looking immensely satisfied with how her dance lessons had turned out. The reception was held in the community hall, and naturally, there was dancing. Jack and Clara's first dance as husband and wife was a waltz that left not a dry eye in the room. They moved together with such perfect unity and obvious love that even the most cynical observers had to admit it was something special. Old Mr. Jacobson raised a toast, his voice carrying through the hall. "To Jack and Clara Morrison, may they always dance through life with the same grace and partnership they have shown us tonight." The celebration continued late into the evening. Jack danced with Rosa Martinez, thanking her again for her patience and skill. Clara danced with Pete, who told her quietly that he had never seen Jack so happy. Even Tom Bradley showed up, and though he did not stay long, he did offer his congratulations with what seemed like genuine sincerity. Perhaps he had finally made his peace with the situation. Jack and Clara had decided to live in the boarding house, at least initially. It was large enough to accommodate both the boarders and their own private quarters on the second floor. Jack would continue working at the Triple Crown Ranch, but he and Clara had plans to eventually save enough to buy a small property of their own. Their first year of marriage was full of adjustments and learning. Living together brought challenges neither had anticipated. Clara was used to running the boarding house alone and had to learn to share decisions and responsibilities. Jack had to adjust to the constant presence of other people in his home, to the loss of the solitude he had always taken for granted. But they worked through each challenge with patience and communication. When Clara felt overwhelmed by the endless demands of the boarding house, Jack would take over the evening meal preparation, despite his limited cooking skills. When Jack struggled with the lack of privacy, Clara would arrange for them to take long rides out to Rosa's homestead or to the creek where they had first talked. They continued to attend every town social, and their dancing remained a source of joy both for themselves and for those who watched them. But they also found joy in quieter moments, reading together by lamplight, working side by side on house repairs, sharing their thoughts and dreams during evening walks. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and terror in equal measure. Jack fussed over Clara constantly, worrying about her health and trying to lighten her workload. Clara found his concern both touching and occasionally suffocating. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. I am quite capable of managing my own body." "I know," Jack said. "I just want to take care of you." "You do take care of me," Clara assured him, softening her tone, "every single day. But you can also trust me to know my own limits." It was a delicate balance, but they found it together. As Clara's pregnancy progressed, they made plans and prepared a nursery in a small room adjacent to their bedroom. Rosa Martinez visited regularly, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and offering advice based on her own experiences raising children decades ago. On a warm September evening in 1880, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next day, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Jack's father, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Jack held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "I am your father and I promise to do my very best by you." Clara, exhausted but radiant, smiled at them both. "He is perfect," she said, "just perfect." Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys. Thomas was a colicky baby who seemed to cry more than he slept, testing both parents' patience and endurance. But he was also the living embodiment of their love, a miracle that had grown from their decision to take a chance on each other. Jack discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed. He would walk the floor for hours with Thomas, singing old songs his mother had taught him and making up new ones when he ran out of remembered verses. Clara marveled at the sight of her strong, capable husband reduced to putty by their tiny son's needs. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Clara gradually returned to managing the boarding house full-time. They hired a young woman named Mary to help with the cleaning and cooking, which gave Clara more time to spend with Thomas and allowed her some breathing room in her days. Jack continued working at the Triple Crown, but he had been promoted to foreman, which came with better pay and more regular hours. He was able to spend more evenings at home, teaching Thomas to walk and later to ride a gentle old mare that Pete had given them as a gift. On Thomas's 3rd birthday, they held a party in the boarding house's dining room. The Ramirez brothers made him a small wooden horse. Rosa Martinez brought a beautiful blanket she had woven. Pete carved him a set of toy animals. The room was full of laughter and love, and Jack looked around at their community, their chosen family, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the path his life had taken. That evening, after Thomas was asleep and the guests had departed, Jack and Clara sat together on their porch as they had so many times before. The night was cool and clear, with a harvest moon rising over the distant hills. "You remember the first time we danced?" Clara asked, leaning against Jack's shoulder. "Of course," Jack said. "How could I forget? I was terrified I would stumble and ruin everything." "I was terrified too," Clara admitted. "Terrified that I had set an impossible standard, that I would never find someone willing to meet it." "And then there you were." "There I was," Jack agreed. "The luckiest cowboy in Texas." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one. Then Clara spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I have been thinking about expanding the boarding house. There is a lot adjacent to our property that is for sale. We could build an addition, add more rooms, maybe even a proper dining hall. The town is growing and there is a real need for quality accommodations." Jack considered this. "It would be a significant undertaking," he said. "But if anyone could make it work, it is you. We have some savings, and I believe the bank would extend us credit based on the boarding house's reputation." "You would support this?" Clara asked. "Even though it would mean more work, more risk." "I will always support your dreams," Jack said firmly. "Just as you have always supported mine. That is what partners do." Over the next 2 years, they made Clara's vision a reality. The expansion was challenging, requiring careful financial management and long hours of work. Jack took a more active role in running the boarding house, using his organizational skills from ranch management to help Clara coordinate contractors and manage the construction. The new section included 8 additional guest rooms and a large dining hall that could accommodate both boarders and outside guests. Clara hired additional staff and began offering meals to non-residents, essentially creating Redemption's first proper restaurant. The business thrived, becoming one of the most successful enterprises in town. In the midst of this expansion, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 1884, a calm and observant baby who seemed to study the world with serious intensity. Thomas, now 4 years old, was initially uncertain about this new addition to the family, but quickly became a protective and loving older brother. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family. Jack eventually left the Triple Crown Ranch to work full-time with Clara in running their expanding business. They purchased the adjacent property and later a third lot, gradually building something that resembled a small hotel more than a simple boarding house. They faced setbacks along the way. A drought in 1885 hurt the local economy, and they had to extend credit to struggling families while managing their own tight finances. A kitchen fire in 1887 caused significant damage that required months of repairs. There were personal challenges too. Clara's mother passed away, and though their relationship had been strained, the loss affected Clara deeply. Jack's old friend Pete was killed in a ranch accident, a tragedy that reminded them both of life's fragility. But through every challenge, they had each other. They had built not just a successful business but a true partnership based on mutual respect, deep love, and the willingness to keep putting in the effort even when things were hard. They never stopped dancing. No matter how busy life became, they attended every town social. As Thomas and Elizabeth grew older, they taught both children to dance as well. Thomas was a natural, moving with an easy grace that reminded people of his father. Elizabeth was more studious about it, learning each step with serious concentration before allowing herself to relax into the rhythm. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a celebration at the community hall. Reverend Matthews gave a speech about how Jack and Clara had become pillars of the community, examples of what commitment and partnership could build. Rosa Martinez, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, told the story of Jack's 3 weeks of dance lessons to an audience that hung on every word. "He came to me with nothing but determination and hope," Rosa said, "and he worked harder than any student I ever taught. Not because dancing itself mattered so much, but because Clara mattered. That is the secret, you see. When you find the right person, no effort is too great, no challenge too difficult. You simply do what needs doing." Jack and Clara danced that night as they had on their wedding day, moving across the floor with the easy unity of a decade's partnership. Their children watched with shining eyes. Their friends applauded. And somewhere in the crowd, young couples watched and wondered if they too might find something so precious. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow, triumph and difficulty. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who surprised everyone by choosing to become a teacher rather than following his father into business or ranching. Elizabeth developed a passion for medicine and eventually left Redemption to study nursing in San Antonio, though she returned regularly to visit. Jack and Clara grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies moving more slowly. But their connection remained as strong as ever. They still took evening walks. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. And yes, they still danced, though with less frequency as the years took their toll on aging joints and muscles. On a warm spring evening in 1908, 30 years after they had first danced together, Jack and Clara sat on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas was visiting with his wife and their 2 children. Elizabeth had just returned from San Antonio with stories of her work at the hospital. The boarding house, now properly called the Whitmore-Morrison Hotel, was thriving under the management of a young couple they had trained. "We have built a good life," Clara said, taking Jack's hand. Her fingers were gnarled with arthritis now, but her grip was still firm. "The best life," Jack agreed, "better than I ever imagined possible." "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Learning to dance, taking a chance on a difficult woman with unreasonable standards," Jack laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not for a single moment. You were never difficult or unreasonable. You simply knew what you wanted and refused to settle for less. That courage changed my life." Your courage changed mine, Clara countered. You could have dismissed my requirement as foolish. You could have tried to convince me to lower my standards. Instead, you met me where I stood. That made all the difference. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, their son and daughter-in-law talking, the sounds of family and life continuing. Jack thought about the lonely, directionless young man he had been 30 years ago, and he could hardly recognize that person. "I love you, Clara Morrison," he said, raising her hand to his lips as he had done so many times over the decades. "And I love you, Jack Morrison," Clara replied, "my dancing cowboy who practiced alone for 3 weeks just to earn one dance with me." "Best 3 weeks I ever spent," Jack said. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together in the comfortable silence of two people who had truly found their home in each other. The journey from that first dance to this moment had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had been traveled together, step by step, measure by measure, like a dance that neither wanted to end. And in the grand ballroom of their lives, surrounded by the music of family, community, and enduring love, Jack and Clara Morrison continued their dance through the years with grace, partnership, and the deep satisfaction that comes from finding exactly what you were looking for, even when you had not fully known you were searching. Their story became legend in redemption, told and retold to new generations. It was the story of how one woman's standard had seemed impossible until one determined man decided it was worth the effort. It was the story of how 3 weeks of practice in secret had led to 30 years of partnership in the light. It was, ultimately, a story about courage. The courage to state what you need, the courage to pursue what you want, and the courage to believe that somewhere out there, someone will meet you where you stand. In the years that followed, long after Jack and Clara had passed into memory, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story to anyone who would listen. They would talk about the boarding house lady who said she would only marry a man who could dance, and the cowboy who practiced alone for 3 weeks to win her heart. They would describe the decades of love and partnership that followed, the business built together, the children raised, the community served. And always, they would end the story the same way. True love is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone willing to put in the work, to meet you where you stand, to keep dancing even when the music gets difficult. That is what my great-grandparents understood, and that is what made their love story worth remembering. The Whitmore-Morrison Hotel stood for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose partnership over pride, effort over ease, and enduring love over temporary comfort. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the old building just right, people swore they could hear music playing and the soft sound of footsteps moving across a dance floor, 1 2 3, 1 2 3, forever in perfect time.